Hi, everyone. This is Eric Nussbaum from the Department of Agriculture, and we're going to start today's session in just a moment. See if anyone else comes on. This is the new employee orientation. I think as I put in the schedule, and just for the folks that are on there to know, that if you have actually been to the new director orientation, this is almost exactly the same, just with less emphasis on some of the director powers and stuff like that. So just to give you a heads up that if you might have some new questions, that's great and everything, but there's not going to be there's not going to be really any new information in this session. So just want to let you know that. As I said, though, this is geared a little bit more toward the new employees, and I hope that they will ask many questions. Because there's at least one name on there that I'm not familiar with, I'll let you know who I am a little bit. I work for the Department of Agriculture in the Soil and Water Conservation District program, but I have a long history with soil and water conservation districts. I used to manage the SWCD back in the late 90s, early 2000s. Did that for about 7 or 8 years before moving to ODA, where I was a water quality specialist for 5 or 6 years, and now I've been doing this job as operations specialist, doing trainings and helping out districts operationally for about the last 10 years. So that's who I am. So a little bit of housekeeping stuff here. It's good to see that everyone is muted, which is great. I am recording this session, so it's available afterwards to any other staff you might have. And also, feel free to ask questions. I love questions. I know they're very challenging in this kind of format, I've noticed, but do feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions, or to type questions in the chat box. If you see me glancing over to the side, I'm actually looking at the chat box to make sure that there's questions there or not. This is a very superficial look at some very important topics. I hope that what happens out of this is it tickles you a little bit in the future, that when certain things come up, that you would go ahead and then ask your manager, or ask board members, or if you're a board member, ask your manager to find out more information about it. I've also been doing kind of more in-depth trainings on some of these that have already happened, and some will still happen. The sessions have been recorded, and the presentations are available online. And there's some reference materials for this session, and actually for all the sessions online. We just discovered that there change in this morning's session that was going to be at 9 actually had been moved to 8:30 tomorrow. I did send out information via email to all the district managers about that, but it looks like we forgot to change it online. So if you are on the website, so if you went to the website and saw it at 9, it's been actually changed to 8:30. So I apologize for that. I'll probably be sending out an email to all the managers apologizing for that and reminding them that 8:30 tomorrow morning. All right, so I'm going to get started here. This is just a brief overview of what we will be talking about. A little bit about who you are as a district, kind of the background, then how OEA and SWCDs relate to each other, both on our level about who we are and what we do, and then a little bit about the capacity grant you receive, and then I'm going to go into these 3 important things, which is important for both directors and the staff, employees, is public meeting law, public records law, and ethics. Now, some of these details of public meetings and records law may not pertain to you as if you're just kind of, conservation technician or something like that, but I think they're really important for you to know and what your part in those laws are. And ethics is going to actually be very important for you as an employee, because as a public employee, there are certain laws related to ethics you need to follow. So I need to pull out some paperwork here. So if you're new to public office, you may not know what the term ORS is, or OAR, or you may, but those are both laws relating to what the state agencies and the public can do. So ORSs, or Oregon Revised Statutes, are laws enacted by the legislature. And so those are what they're working on right now while they're in session. OARs are actually written by the departments and agencies of the state, and they're usually done in order to enact and clarify the statutes that are enacted by the legislature. Both have the same force of law. Both are considered law and legal. The law that is related to soil and water conservation districts primarily and the agricultural water quality program is in ORS 568. And so I'm just going to go over a few parts of ORS 568. They outline how you do elections. They outline how the powers of the board of directors. They outline all these different things. Good to see more folks coming on. This is great. So ORS 568, there's different sections, and the first one is the policy of the legislature, and I'm going to go over that in a minute. That explains who you are in essence and why you exist. The general powers of the board of directors, the 5 basic legal requirements, and then an important one for a lot of districts is your bond and taxing levying authority. There's also statutes related to how elections happen, how districts are formed and how they're merged. They're all in this, and it's really fascinating reading if you like to read that kind of stuff. So just want to talk to you a little bit about the policies of the district. I'm going to read something here for you, which is the policy of the legislature, because I think it's important for folks to understand that. Okay. Oh, okay. I see what you're saying, Rhonda. That's great. So the policy says, in recognition of the ever-increasing demands on the renewable natural resources of the state and the need to conserve, protect, and develop such resources, it is hereby declared to be the policy of the Legislative Assembly to provide for the conservation of the renewable natural resources of the state and thereby to conserve and develop natural resources, control and prevent soil erosion, control floods, conserve and develop water resources and water quality. And actually then there's actually a whole nother list that I'm not going to go into. That's the policy of the legislature. That is what they would like to do. And then it gets down to number 2, where it says is further the policy of the Legislative Assembly to authorize soil and water conservation districts established under ORS 568 to participate in effectuating the policy set forth in subsection 1 of this section. So what this says is that the legislature says this is our general policy to conserve, protect, and develop natural resources. And the way we're going to do this is to have the districts effectuate this policy. So that is the job of the district. It is true that we have this great creation myth about SWCDs coming out of the Dust Bowl days and the Soil Conservation Service and then the local partners. That's all very true, and it's a great creation myth. But I think it's important to realize that the job of the district is to effectuate these policies of the legislature. What the district is allowed to do is under the 568-550 rules. And what is important about understanding the 568.55 rules is that as a special district, a district that is similar to a fire district, a park and rec district, an irrigation district, a drainage district, ambulance district, 911 district, all these different kind of special districts, which you are on the same level of, is that by law, you are only allowed to do what the legislature has authorized you to do. You may have some great ideas about what you can do, but if it's not authorized by the legislature, you're not allowed to do it. The good news for soil and water conservation districts is that under 568.550, which outlines the general powers of the board of directors, the district through the board of directors is authorized to do a lot of different things. Some of them are the obvious things as you do now, which is conservation plans, working on water quality issues. But these authorizations allow you to do scientific research. They allow you to own buildings. They allow you mortgage property. They allow you to get into written agreements for land conservation. They allow you to hold easements. there's a whole list of things that you're allowed to do. But it is important to realize that if it's not listed in this list, you're actually not authorized to do it. And it has come sometimes, unfortunately, where some districts had some fabulous ideas, but we discovered that the district was not authorized to do it. So I always encourage districts, if they have something brand new that they'd like to do and it's really different and exciting, that they should take a look at the statutes and make sure that it's actually in there, that they're authorized to do it. All right, I'm going to move on now to explaining a little bit about the Department of Agriculture and how we relate to you and what this relationship we have between the Department of Agriculture and Soil and Water Conservation Districts is. Because we're a state agency and you're a form of local government. But through statute, there is a lot of back and forth relationship between us. So a little bit about the Department of Agriculture. This is a slightly out of date, but the most current flow chart for how our department is organized. And the important part is to look at the Natural Resource Program area, headed by Stephanie Page, who was my water quality specialist way back when at the SWCD. And this is the area where the Soil and Water Conservation District program is, along with the Ag Water Quality Program. We work very closely with the Ag Water Quality Program at the SWCD program, but they are two distinct programs underneath the Natural Resource Program area. Just a real quick, this is kind of the managers in the Natural Resource Program area, and Morgan Allen is the manager for the water quality in the SWCD program. So the SWCD program is very small. It is just Sandy Hyatt, who is the grant administration officer, and she also does elections. And then myself is the operations specialist who does these trainings and provides some other services. The SWCC, who you see kind of off on the side there, stands for the Soil and Water Conservation Commission. They are an advisory board to the SWCD program, very similar to how the Board of Agriculture is an advisory group to the Department of Agriculture. They meet quarterly and they're made up of 7 members from around the state, and those members have to be on the board of directors, at least when they're appointed at the time of appointment, from the Soil and Water Conservation Districts. Barbara Boyer is the chair of the Soil and Water Conservation Commission at the moment. She is also the chair of the Yamhill SWCD, and she's also on the Board of Agriculture. She's a very busy woman. So we take ideas and thoughts and reports to the Soil and Water Conservation Commission, and they give us feedback on that and some advice on different policies that we might be looking to implement. So you can take a look at what we do in terms of the SWCD program at ODA in terms of services and oversight. So the services we provide is the capacity grant management. The grant does come from OWEB, the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board. However, we do the grant management for that through the reporting of the scope of work and the focus area action plans. Sandy also coordinates the director of elections. Big job for her every 2 years. And then I provide the operational technical assistance on the phone, used to be on site, hopefully be on site again. I just need to add on there through GoToMeeting and Zoom. Same with the trainings. I can do them, usually love to do them in person, miss doing them in person, on all sorts of different topics related to the operations of your district. And then sometimes I get involved with facilitation issues and helping districts facilitate different kinds of meetings. We do have particular oversight, and that is that by law and in the statute, we have to review your annual work plans and long-range business plans. That's one of the reasons that those are sent to us every year, and we keep a long-range business plan on file. Those are usually good for 5 years or 10 years, whatever your board has decided. But we do ask to see your annual work plan each year. And we also have to receive your annual reports and financial reports for review. And your financial report is the same as your audit if you hear about having an audit. And then also we hold public hearings if there's going to be any boundary changes in mergers, if you're going to look at sometimes decreasing your board from 7 members to 5, we have to approve that. There's all sorts of approvals and public hearings. There's also some other more obscure oversights that we have. Some of them are actually in rule as opposed to statute, but they're not ones we normally implement. But there are some other areas where we have oversight. Any questions so far? All right. All right, I am going to very briefly go through a description of the Ag Water Quality Program. And I see Kevin is on, and hopefully I'll do this justice, Kevin. There is a more in-depth session that lasts about 45 minutes on the Water Quality Program, and I'm going to be trying to do this in about like 2 or 3 minutes. So there is a difference here. So the Water Quality Program is based around the Agriculture Water Quality Management Act. And for those who don't know what that is essentially Oregon's response to non-point source pollution from agricultural and rural lands. So similar to how there's Forest Practices Act, which outlines how forestry deals with non-point source pollution, the Ag Water Quality Management Act is how the agricultural community is responding to water quality issues from non-point source pollution, and the development of TMDLs and the development of ag water quality plans to meet those TMDLs. In Oregon, they divided up the state into certain management areas, and each management area has a local management agency, and by law, that is designated to be SWCDs. And so you act as a local management agency and help ODA work through the ag water quality plans through a local advisory committee. The local advisory committees are local landowners who advise ODA in creating the rules and the ag water quality plans for that area. The water quality staff, of which I think we're at 7 right now, 7, 8. We've unfortunately lost a few through the budget process. They're the ones that help implement it on ODA side, and they work with soil and water conservation districts to work with the local advisory committees, and then also to work on projects and do compliance and things like that. The way we work with SWCDs is through the district capacity grant. Way back in the original days of the Ag Water Quality Program, the legislature gave the Department of Agriculture money directly to give grants to districts to help with the implementation of the Ag Water Quality Management Act, the local advisory committees, and developing the Ag Water Quality plans, and in implementing the plans. So as time went on and OWEB, Oregon Watershed Management Board, came along, that grant, the money and the grants were given out by OWEB. So currently the grants come from OWEB, but they do go through us. But they still remain at its core how this soil and water conservation districts help ODA with implementing the ag water quality plans, helping the landowners meet the ag water quality plans and the rules, as well as just keep your doors open so they can do all that work. And that's why the capacity grant is divided into district operations, which help you keep your doors open, and then the scope of work and focus area work, which is geared toward helping landowners meet the ag water quality rules and implement the ag water quality plan. District implementation areas is an area where the ODA is focusing on certain areas to look for areas for potential violations, as well as areas where there could be uplift and improve the water quality of that area. That's a real brief, quick overview. As I said, I was doing that in a couple minutes, but Ellen Hammond from the Water Quality Program will be doing a more in-depth discussion about the Ag Water Quality Program and that relationship with districts. So I encourage you to take that on Thursday, I guess, which is tomorrow, especially if you're one of those staff who do work with the Ag Water Quality staff from ODA and work on the scope of work. Any questions? Thanks, Kevin. All right, I'm just going to go over this briefly, since this is about for employees and not directors. But just so you know, what is the job of your directors? Well, the biggest job of your directors is to make sure that the monies of the district, which is the public money, all monies held by the district are considered public funds, that those are spent correctly. So their big job is fiduciary. And they do that through creating budgets and making sure budgets are followed, looking at financial reports. Some approve expenses directly, some do not. But that is, I would say, their biggest job is to make sure the public's money is spent correctly. And then their other job is to ensure that folks are following the annual work plan, doing what you do performance reviews of the manager, sometimes for the staff. Smaller districts have performance evaluations done by the staff. Larger districts tends to be done by the manager or whoever your immediate supervisor is. And also all public contracting, the board is the public contracting board, and so they have oversight over all public contracting. One of the other big things that they're supposed to be doing is thinking about the long range plan of the district. What is the district going to look like in 5 years, 10 years, 50 years, and develop and approve that strategic plan and update it as needed, doing the long-term visioning. The last part is, well, they're elected officials. They represent the public. They represent people in their zone. They represent people for the entire district. And so it's their job to represent their interests and bring their interests to the board. Of importance to you as an employee, because this happens quite a bit, is what is that relationship between you and the board of directors? Well, it depends on your district and what your district policies are. For a larger district, it tends to be that there's less direct interaction between the board and the staff, and it's the district manager that interacts with the staff, and then the board interacts with the district manager. In smaller district, it tends to be more direct interaction between the board and the employees. But as I caution the board of directors, it's important to realize that you should be only having one supervisor. And as I discussed more with the directors, is that in policy, there actually should be very clear delineation about who the employees' bosses are, especially if they're directly managed by the board. And there should only be one. So I encourage you as employees to find out from your manager or from the board, who is your supervisor? Because the last thing you need as an employee, and I hear about it often, is that you have 7 or 5 bosses, and they each all come in and they're each trying to tell you what to do. And that's not generally appropriate unless for some reason the board has decided that you do have 5 or 7 bosses, but you really should only have one bosses. That doesn't mean that the board doesn't come in and communicate with you and perhaps ask for information, but you should be aware of who is actually your boss, and the rest of the board members are not your boss and should not be directing your activities. So as I have down there is a difference between supervision and just providing, requesting information. But I do think it's appropriate, and I've seen it sometimes where board members take up a lot of employees' time because they want to come in and talk and they want to tell you things, great stories. All the people that they think they should talk to want a lot of information. And I would definitely encourage you, if that becomes a problem, to talk to your manager or your supervisor if you don't have a manager and you just have a board, and make sure that there's a balance between you providing that communication with the board members directly versus what you need to do to get your job done. So, any questions about that? All right. We seem to keep growing a little bit more and more on here. So the 5 basic legal requirements. A lot of these only have to do if maybe your manager's dealing with them, your board's dealing with them. But if you, especially if you're an administrative person who's actually probably doing a lot of this work, I think it's important, or your bookkeeper. So there's 5 basic legal requirements in Oregon Revised Statutes 568. This doesn't mean you have lots of other requirements, especially as an employer. As an employer, you have all those things related to the employment department and taxes and OSHA and just your workers' comp and all those things. But these are the ones that are in Oregon Revised Statute 568, which interests us most. Goodbye, Chuck. You said you got to leave. but I'm glad you understand that now. Good. Um, so the annual work plan has to be done every year, and as I said before, submitted to us. And the annual work plan is basically an outline of what you're going to be doing for the coming year. Besides being required by law, it really helps organize the work of the district. The long range plan is your kind of your guiding document. It has your vision, it has your goals and strategies, and gives you that vision for long-term work of the district. And that you have to have one that's active and on file with us. And generally the board will approve them in kind of 5-year increments. Every year you have to have an annual meeting, and it's actually an annual meeting of the landowners. It's not an annual meeting of your board of directors. You just host it for the landowners. Not that many, sometimes you have a lot of landowners come and sometimes you have none, but it is an annual meeting of the landowners of the district. And that is where you have to present your annual report and annual financial report. It has to be noticed in a certain way. It's in statute, it's very particular. And there you present your annual report, which is basically what you did over the last biennium. Any format you want. I've seen things from a double-sided or one-page to, I think a long time ago, I actually saw the one done as a calendar, which was very fascinating. And then your annual financial report, and that is essentially your audit or financial review or report in lieu of audit. And so you give those out. So those are the basic things that actually by law you have to do every year, or at least have on file in terms of the long-range plan. Real briefly, in case you're involved in this, about the district capacity grant, as I said, it is divided into 2 sections, the operations section and the scope of work, focus area, technical assistance part. These are the due dates for that. And that's just, especially if you're someone new and you're an administrative person, that is just for you to do. You should know that, but your financial review or audit is due at the end of the year for the previous biennium, or not biennium, but previous fiscal year, which runs from July 1st to June 30th. And we get a copy of that. Your annual report is due on June 30th for the previous fiscal year. And then you have your annual meeting, which there's no real timetable set, but you have to at least have your annual report and audit done because you need to present that to them. Any questions at all? Take a breath here. All right. So, what is a public meeting? So this is the definition of a public meeting, and kind of the easiest way to explain it in some ways is that it's when your board gets together. You have a quorum of the board get together and talk about board business, make a decision, deliberate toward a decision, and that's what a public meeting is. And the requirement of public meetings is the public gets to know about it and can attend the meeting, and also that all official actions are actually by an open public vote. So the public gets to attend, so you have to let them know when it is. One of the confusions about public meetings, it's obvious the board is a public meeting, but one of the confusions are about committees and subcommittees, task forces. It doesn't matter what it's called. I just talked the other day, there was a district who the chair decided to call a committee a task force, thinking that made it not a committee and not subject to public meeting law. Well, it doesn't matter what you call it. If this group appointed by the board has been given authority by the board to make decisions on behalf of the board or provide recommendations to the board or provide information to the board where they're going to use to make a decision, that all makes it subject to public meeting law. And it doesn't matter who is on that committee or task force. It doesn't matter if there's a minority of board members, one board member, no board members. If this group, this committee, is appointed by the board of directors, it acts in essence like its own mini board. and has to follow the same rules. So if the board appoints, let's say it's a 5-member board of directors, and they only appoint 2 board members and say the manager of the district, so it's a 3-member committee. Well, now that becomes its own 3-member board, and so any 2 of those getting together to discuss that committee meeting is actually having its own public meeting. So committees actually have to be noticed the same way as regular board meetings, and they also have to have minutes, and those minutes have to be distributed to whoever wants them. So when we talk about public meeting law, a lot of it makes a lot of sense about regular board meetings and noticing it and doing the minutes and distributing the minutes, making sure that you follow executive session law if you go into that. All those same things apply to your committees. If they've been appointed by the board of directors and they've been given authority to make decisions or recommendations to the full board. And that's really important to understand. Real briefly before we're going to notice is I'm going to talk about quorums, because there is some confusion often about quorums. So quorums for both the board or any committee is a majority of the board positions, whether or not they're filled and whether or not they're at the meeting. So if you have a 7-member board that has 7 positions, a quorum is always going to be 4 people. If you only have, say, 5 positions filled, you got 2 vacant positions, a quorum is still going to be 4 people, even if you only have 5 filled positions. So a quorum is about the positions, not the filled positions. And the same way that when you have a meeting and you want to pass any kind of action, awarding a contract, passing a motion or a resolution, it's about a majority vote of the positions, not those present, not those filled. It's a majority vote of the positions. So if you have a 7-member board, you'll always need 4 yay votes. 5-member board, 3 yay votes. And it doesn't matter how many people are there. You have a 7-member board, but only 5 filled positions and all 5 come to the meeting. You still need 4 yay votes. And it did come up as a question previously about abstentions. Abstentions are basically the equivalent of a nay vote because they're a no vote. They don't count as a yes vote. So if you have 3 yay votes and 1 abstention, that motion will not pass because you don't have 4 yay votes. You have 1 abstention and only 3 yay votes for a 7-member board. So that's how quorum and the voting works. So if you're going to have a public meeting, you have to notice those meetings. A meeting without a proper notice is a violation of public meeting law, and there are some consequences that we'll talk about in a minute. So the requirements of the notice are listed down here. Essentially, you have to say where it is, when it is, and what you're going to talk about, which is fairly simple. And I always say, just the best public meeting notice you can put out there is your agenda. Because when you think about what's on your agenda, you have the time, you have the place, and you have what you're going to be talking about. So that makes a great agenda. A great public notice. How far in advance do you have to notice your meeting? Interestingly, in law, it does not, for a regular board meeting, it does not state how far in advance. The Attorney General's in their guidance says 2 weeks is what they would like to see. But I always say with SWCDs, I think we're lucky if we get it out a week ahead of time. What's important in the way it is written, it's in advance notice so that interested folks can actually attend. So think of it that way. You got to make it in enough advance notice that people who are interested in your meeting know when and where it is and what you're talking about to get there. Special meetings and emergency meetings have their own noticing requirements, which I went over in the public meeting law. If you'd like to know more about that, you can check out the recorded session for that, which happened, I believe, on Monday. An important thing is that if anyone asks you in writing that they wish to be notified about every meeting, they have to be notified of every meeting and in a way that they've asked. If they say, I want to be notified by snail mail, well, you got to notify them by snail mail. And there are some people who still do that, though most people are fine with getting notices by email. So if your meeting is going to have an executive session, and we're going to talk about executive sessions here in a moment, then it has to be in the meeting notice, and you have to explain why. I'll go over that in more detail in a moment. As far as how you put your public notice out there, these are some of the different ways you could do that. A lot of folks think putting on your website or Facebook page is enough. It is not. The only way that actually by court case has been shown to be an appropriate way that covers your bases is that you send it to your local newspaper of general circulation and your local media representative. Now, it's not your responsibility for them to publish it. They get to publish it if they want to or not. And this is for regular board meetings. This isn't for some other instances where you have to cause things to be published. But for your regular board meetings, your special board meetings, you just have to let the media know. If they decide not to let everyone else know through by publishing it, not your issue. But it is adequate to send it out there and go ahead and let them decide whether to publish it. You've done your job. I do think, though, even though it's not sufficient on its own, putting it on your website and your social media is good public policy, because often the newspaper doesn't print it or let people know, and you do want people to understand what you're doing. You want good transparency, and by letting the public know is good transparency. So an executive session, and as employees, you have certain rights in executive session we'll go over in a minute. But an executive session is a meeting or part of a meeting that is closed to certain persons for the purpose of discussing sensitive matters. There is only a very limited number of sensitive matters. There's about a dozen or so. These are the ones I put up here are the ones that are most important. The ones that as an employee is probably to discuss your employment, and to discuss if there's disciplinary action or a complaint against you as an employee, and for your performance evaluations. But there are some other ones here. So if you go in executive session, there's a whole script to how you go into executive session. That is available on our website and also in our district guidebook, and it's available at the Department of Justice's website about executive sessions. The news media is allowed to attend. Their job is to be a watchdog and make sure you don't stray from those very specific topics you can. Just like regular public meetings, there are minutes, but they're kept separate, and they don't have to be transcribed if they're recording. As an employee, you should know your rights. As an employee, if they're going to be talking about you for a performance evaluation or a disciplinary action or to discuss a complaint filed against you, you have to be informed that they are going to go in executive session about this, because it is your choice whether you want it to be an executive session or not. And if you want it to be held in open public session, that is your right. So two important things. One, the board has to inform you, or a committee, because a committee can go in executive session, that they will be talking about you under one of these statutes. And if so, they have to ask you if it's okay to be in executive session or you want it in public session. If it's an executive session, they can exclude you from that meeting and talk about you without you there. They probably will have you there, or maybe have you there for part of it, but it is their right to exclude you because you waived your right to be held in public. So just keep that in mind. If it's in public, then anyone in the public can be there. So, there's some trade-offs for that. So I have definitely been at meetings, one where an employee was going to be fired. They wanted to go into executive session to discuss the matter, discuss termination clauses, and that such forth. And the employee said, no, I want it to be in public, and I want everyone to know why you're firing me, and I want to be able to respond in public so everyone can hear my side of the story. and that was within their rights. I was in another meeting one time where on the spur of the moment, they said, not really spur, at the beginning of the meeting, they had decided that they were going to add a performance evaluation for one of the employees. That's fine to do, to add an executive session at the time of the meeting for any of the legal reasons. But that employee was not at the meeting. And I informed them, I said, well, I don't know how you can go executive session because you aren't informing the employee that you're going in executive session to discuss their performance evaluation, and they have the right to decide whether it's an open meeting or not. Unfortunately, in that case, they pretty much ignored me and just went ahead and did it, but that's a violation of executive session law. And violations of executive session laws for board members can be costly. It's a fine of $1,000 for participating in a executive session that was illegal, and in that case, that was an illegal executive session. The last part about public meeting law is that boards may not reach a final decision in executive sessions. That is because we're a sunshine state. There are no such things as secret ballots for public agencies and entities, and therefore they can't make those decisions. They can talk about where they might be headed. They could possibly do a straw poll, but they have to make any kind of final decision out in public, and so that is so the public knows how each person voted. Public meeting law, you also have to have written minutes. Minutes actually have to be in physical form at some point. They can't be kept just electronically, and that's because things on paper are the only things that last forever still, or close to forever. So minutes have to be typed out if they're recorded, and they actually have to be printed out and kept in paper form. They can be kept in electronic forms for sending out in emails and to the staff and everything like that, but a physical copy of the minutes have to be kept by the district. The minutes can be very simple or they can be very complex. If you're one of those employees listening who does minutes, it's really going to be up to the board to tell you how detailed they want the minutes to be. But by law, it just has to be the substance of a discussion. They don't have to be the detailed he said, she said, they said, this, that, and the other thing, just the substance of the discussion. It is important that in the minutes that it's recorded how each person voted. When there's a unanimous decision, that's really simple. You can just look up and see who was there, the attendance. Usually that's put at the top of the meeting, and so you know that each of those board members voted yes. However, if it's a split decision, those individual votes do need to be recorded. One way is if it's a 5-2 approval of something, you would sometimes just write the nay votes were, and then you could extrapolate out who, and because of who was in attendance, who voted yes. But somehow someone reading the minutes has to know how each individual board member voted on each issue that comes before the board. And I have seen minutes where that has not been the case, and I usually go back and tell the district to change their minutes. Executive session minutes, if they're written out or if they're just as sound recordings, are kept separate, usually in a locked cabinet, usually in a sealed manila envelope. You do have to keep those in case a judge asks for them to be unsealed. District minutes, as I said before, have to be retained permanently, and actually they have to be retained in paper form. There is some movement to change that a little bit, but there's still some distrust about what kind of electronic form is going to be permanent forever. I mean, how many people now have floppy drives? And if you kept your minutes from the 80s on a floppy drive, would you be able to access them right now? So that's why they still have to be in physical form. Anyone who requests minutes have to be given those minutes. Generally, Sandy, if Sandy's still on here, yep. Sandy and I love to see your minutes. Every now and again we get around to request it in writing to see or to have your minutes sent to us, and we actually do read those minutes. That's how we learn a lot about what you're doing. All right, that's the end of the public meeting laws part. Are there any questions at all? All right, we're going to move on to public records. So again, Oregon being a sunshine state, as I say it, the basic public records law is that every person has the right to inspect any public record of a public body. Are we not required to upload minutes? I'm assuming you upload to ODA. Yes, we require you to send our minutes to us. And Sandy is the keeper of those minutes. So, but that is separate from public records law. You have to keep the minutes yourself and have them on file with yourself. So what is a public record? Well, public record is any writing, and a writing is loosely defined these days as not just physical writing, not just typed out, but any electronic record. Also includes text messages, voicemails, emails, anything like that. Those are considered writing by the law. That contains information related to the conduct of public business. So essentially, everything that you do is related to the conduct of public business, and even to the fact that what you're writing right now to take notes about this is probably considered a public record. You may not have to keep that public record, but if you have it, it is a public record. There are only certain kinds of records you have to retain. But essentially, if you're writing anything down that's related to public business, it is going to be considered a public record. So some of those ones, as I said, are emails that are related to district business and between the office and directors and between the and those need to be retained. Text messages and voicemail also are. So for some of you employees that use your personal phones to do text messages and voicemail, at least for text messages, you're not allowed to delete those text messages until through the records retention policy or you can. Those text messages become public record that are on your phone. And I just would let you know that you need to be careful about that you don't destroy those records by deleting them, and that if there's ever a public records request, you're going to have to go through those text messages to see if there's anything related to that public records request. And if the district ever finds itself in litigation, the court could ask to see your phone and your text messages. So just be aware about how you use text messages. Voicemail is a public record, but it is one of those things that you're allowed to delete right away. And so, as I was once told by a Department of Justice lawyer, you should delete your voicemails right away so that they don't remain discoverable public records. Because emails with directors, I don't know if there might be some directors on here, but it is important for directors to know that if they're using their personal email account, that opens up their personal email account to be discoverable in case there's litigation. So I encourage directors, and if you're a manager or staff person or administrative person on this, for directors to have their own very specific email address related only for district business so that they don't open up their personal email address to discoverability. As far as retaining those emails, someone on either side, either the directors, usually the person who sends those emails is the one that retains it. But somewhere, if there's emails between the office and the directors, someone should be retaining those emails. Now, how long you have to keep those records is in your records retention policy. I'm not going to go into this in detail. There is some minimum standards set by the state, but then each district should have their own records retention policy. How long you keep different kinds of emails, how long you keep contracts, how long you keep grant records, how long you keep reports. It is outlined minimum state standards and minimum, and then the district comes up with either meeting those minimum standards or increasing them. It is important, since everything you write down could be considered a public record, and if there's a public records request, you have to go through and you have to disclose it, that if it's not a record that needs to be retained and you do not need it for whatever purpose, that you do go ahead and delete or shred or whatever you do records that don't need to be retained. And then you should also go through your records retention policy every year and go ahead and, as I say, have a shredding party and get rid of records that you no longer have to have by law or no longer and you no longer require. Some districts like to keep things longer than records retention policy, especially some project details, because they do come handy in the future. But anything you don't need to keep through the minimum retention schedule, you should probably get rid of so they aren't laying around and subject to disclosure if you get a public records request. So a public records request, if someone makes a public records request, you need to follow your policy, and all districts are required to have a policy. There are definitely laws related to how long you can take to request it, setting up your fee schedule, how long that you have to get back to it. And that should all be in your public records request policy. And as I said, that if someone asks for some particular information, you have to look through all your records. So the more records you have around, the more you're going to have to look through. It might take more time. There are exemptions. Most exemptions are conditional, but there are a whole lot of them, and you probably need to go through those exemptions. Public employees, your personal address and telephone number and personal information like that is exempt from disclosure. But as I like to tell directors, elected officials don't have that same kind of exemption. Elected officials, their personal address and telephone number, and for whatever reason, date of birth, are not exempt unless they can show that there's personal safety issues involved, and that's very specific. And that has to be done, actually asked for in writing to the district, and has to be proven that there is some actual personal safety issues. So that's real brief. I believe my public records session is tomorrow, and I'm not sure what time, where I'm going to go into more detail about these different topics. Any questions about public records before we go into ethics? All right. This is the last big topic. So ethics law is really important. Ethics law can get you in trouble. It's one of those things that show up in the news every now and again. So who is covered by ethics law? So public officials, and I have the list of public officials there. So it's not just elected officials, it's not just employees, but also agents of the district, someone who's representing the district, might be under contract with you, and then also importantly, certain volunteers. And those would be what are called regular volunteers, volunteers who work with you on a regular basis, come in every week or every month to do certain tasks for you. It's not about occasional volunteers, like say volunteers will help you with your plant sale, or you put together an ivy pull, stuff like that. Those wouldn't be considered public officials. Also covered are your relatives. Members of the household, whoever lives in your household. If you're an employee, everyone that lives in your household is covered by ethics, as well as your relatives. And there's a list of who your relatives are down there. So this is important to know, that when you start thinking about ethics and potential ethics violations, those folks like your spouse and your children and your parents, they are actually covered under this law. So they're getting ensnared in this law, even though they don't work for the government. So the basic law says that you can't use your position for financial gain or avoidance of financial detriment. And some really easy examples about that. The most simple one is the use of your copy machine in that office. It's a violation of ethics law for you to use that for personal use, say to make copies of some document like your driver's license or something like that, if the public isn't allowed to do it too. If the public's allowed to go in and use that copy machine, then sure, go ahead and use it, because the public gets to do that too. But if not, that's an avoidance of financial detriment. Using, even for a short time, for a quick errand, a district vehicle, because it's a truck and you need to move something large around, The public doesn't get to use that truck. Therefore, that's a violation of ethics law. So to think about what would be a basic violation of ethics law is what, if you're going to use the resources of the district, will that be a financial gain or avoidance of financial detriment that the rest of the public does not have that opportunity for? There are exceptions to this rule. Some of them might actually, you folks, if you speak sometimes to groups, you might be given an honorarium. That is completely fine, up to $50. If you get an award for your professional achievement, you're doing your job just because you work at the district, but if you didn't solicit that award and you got it, that's fine. Which actually happened to out at the SWCD. We won this big international prize, and we used it to pay our expenses for a trip to Australia where they were giving out the prize. And that was an unsolicited award, and therefore that was perfectly fine to receive that award and then use it to pay those expenses. I have the underline there, and that's because some of you might have an administrative interest with issue. So an administrative interest issue for managers would be if you can award contracts, or for maybe the administrative staff, if you have the authority to go and purchase supplies. It's that would be an administrative interest where you have the ability to do certain things that would be of benefit to other people. So in that case, you cannot receive a gift of more than $50 per calendar year from that person or business or something like that. So if you notice, if you go to those, SDAO conference or even Connect, where the vendors that are there, they're giving out little gifts, or they might have a drawing for something, what you win in the drawing is a very personal nature, because it's potential that if you're a manager or maybe an administrative person, you might use their services. They have to make sure that the value of whatever they're giving to you is less than $50. If you, as a manager at the SWCD, I could approve contracts up to a certain amount. We particularly used one particular excavator contractor because they were available and had the equipment and worked with us a lot, so they would often be the lowest bid. Every now and again, we'd get together for lunch to talk about projects, and he'd ask to pay for my lunch as a thank you. And that's perfectly fine as long as those lunches don't add up to more than $50 per calendar year, because there was an administrative interest between this excavator and myself. So is that clear what an administrative interest is and that $50 limit? Do remember that, getting back to who is covered under ethics law, that has to deal with your relatives too. So if you have a contractor who says, well, if I can't take you out to dinner, I'm going to take your spouse out to dinner, or I'll take your brother out to dinner. Your spouse or brother is covered under the same law, so they cannot receive more than a $50 gift per calendar year from anyone that you might have an administrative interest over. They don't have the direct administrative interest, but you do. The one exception to this, and I'm not going to say that this is absolute, but is my understanding that they have decided at the Ethics Commission that if you've had a regular and normal relationship with someone before you get into the position where you would have an administrative interest, and you have regularly exchanged gifts over $50 per calendar year, like for instance, perhaps your neighbor, you and your neighbor exchange really nice bottles of wine every year, or you have monthly dinners and you go back and forth providing a really nice bottle of wine, way worth more than $50 over the year. And that's been ongoing before you have this administrative interest, and that's totally fine. You don't have to change a regular ongoing relationship. However, if it was a $20 a bottle of wine on your birthday every year, and then suddenly they want to give you, a $100 bottle of wine on your birthday, that actually would be a violation of ethics, because that was not happening before you took on this position. So here's some additional prohibitions. The one about confidential information, often as employees and certainly as directors, you may see confidential information in farm plans, people's business plans. You may be looking at their operations, and you will gain probably some business knowledge. You can't, if you have a similar business, say, you can't use that information you gain from your job for personal gain, and go like, oh, I see that this person is growing, this crop, and boy, I think I can do it better. You have to be careful about using confidential information that way. And then we have actual and potential conflict of interest, which we'll get into next. Any questions so far? Okay. All right. This part was written more for board members, but it does pertain to public employees. If you have a conflict of interest, where board members, it is divided between a potential conflict of interest and an actual conflict of interest. With public employees, it's not so much. So if you have a conflict of interest, you have to notify your appointing official in writing of the conflict, and then you shouldn't participate in any kind of decision making that happens because of that conflict of interest. I don't actually usually see a conflict of interest policy for employees, but the district should certainly have one. For board members, they split up into potential conflict of interest and actual conflict of interest. And we're going to define those in a moment here. Well, actually, we'll define them right now. How's that? So an actual conflict of interest, this is actually a little bit easier to understand. An actual conflict of interest is if you have an action, make a decision, or recommendation, then the effect of which would be some benefit or avoidance of detriment for you or a relative or a business which you're associated with. So some examples of that, which do come up often, are that board members or maybe a relative of theirs, there's a contract to be approved by the board, and one of those board members bid on the contract or their relatives. That would be an actual conflict of interest, because either they themselves or a relative or a business of theirs, they're going to have a financial effect. Another one that's a little bit less known about, there are some districts where there's relatives who are on the board and on the staff, and therefore there's a conflict of interest if there's going to be any kind of voting on discipline matters, on pay raises, and potentially even the budget. If the budget shows a pay raise for the employee, that would actually be an actual conflict of interest for the board member's relative. So you have to be careful about those kind of things. So those are actual conflicts of interest, where there's actual financial benefit or avoidance of detriment. A potential conflict of interest is any action, well, there might be a financial gain or avoidance of financial detriment or a change. An example for this one would be that if the board is approving a contract to go out to bid, and that board member or their relative knows they're going to bid on that contract. Just because they put it out doesn't mean they're going to get it, so it's only a potential, but it is potentially there. One of the things that people need to be careful about, a lot of board members do projects on their property, maybe a riparian project or an in-stream project. The board member, before taking any official action on that, should be really careful to take a look and see if there would be any financial benefit from that, or possibly be any financial benefit. Some of those kind of projects, obviously avoid financial detriment if the grant is putting up fencing that they would normally do or want to do. And other ones, it may be that there's some value added to the property because livestock tanks are put in, or more landscaping is put in through like riparian plantings. On the other hand, if it's maybe just an in-stream project, that probably isn't going to have a financial benefit to the board member just because they put logs and stones in the creek. But a board member or an employee, if it's an employee's land, should at some point really think about whether they should be voting on or discussing actions that involve their own projects. There are some exceptions to this. One of the major ones are if the board is making a decision on something that's going to affect all agricultural operators. Some districts after a fire will buy seed and give it out to all the people affected by the fire. That's totally fine if some of the board members are actually affected in the same way and would take some of that seed. Also, membership on a board of directors or in a 501c, probably a C3, that's the most common C. That is actually okay too. So if the board member wants to vote to give a grant to a local nonprofit they're on the board of, that's totally fine too. And then the last one here is if that vote by that person is necessary. So remember, getting back to the fact that a district with 5 board members have to have 3 yay votes, but perhaps say only 3 people showed up at the board meeting. There's an actual conflict of interest, and so that board member can't vote. In actuality, they can vote. That is permitted. It's not the best public action, public policy to do that, and you should probably find ways to get a person on the phone, a board member on the phone, or delay that decision. But if they need to take an action in order to get the minimum number of votes, they're able to do that. And that's ethics law in a real briefly. There's a lot more to it. Any questions? All right, we're in the home stretch here. So if you've come on board, you know there are a whole lot of acronyms, dozens and dozens of them. These are some of the ones that are related specifically to kind of the operations of the district. I'm not going to go into, hopefully you all know what NRCS is and BLM, things like that. But these are some particular ones that are new if you're new to this field. So SDAO is Special Districts Association of Oregon. They provide financial services, training, insurance to their members, and they're made up of all the different kinds of special districts in the state. So that includes, as I think I mentioned before, like fire districts, irrigation districts, drainage districts, 911 districts. All those kind of special districts belong to this organization. So if you ever heard the term SDAO, that's who they are. They have great trainings. They have great advice. They actually have lawyers on their staff. So a lot of times I send district, when I get questions, send the districts to SDAO because they have the lawyers and we don't. The Oregon Association of Conservation Districts is the statewide membership organizations for SWCDs. One of their main duties is to represent districts in the legislature, do lobbying. That is what a lot they're doing right now. Tomorrow, OACD and Ocean, the next organizations, and I believe actually now the Network of Oregon Watershed Councils are, and I think maybe perhaps even COLT, the Coalition of Oregon Land Trusts, will be doing a panel so you can get to know them. But Ocean is an employee network, so it's for SWC employees who become members, and they work on capacity building and education. They put on what's known as Connect normally. It didn't happen this last year, and we're unsure if it's going to happen this year. But that's a 3-day conference for SWCD employees, and it covers a lot of workshops on technical aspects, administrative aspects, all sorts of things, and Watershed Councils also participate in that. The Network of Oregon Watershed Council is the mirror image of OACD. They're to support Oregon's watershed councils. And then OWEB, Oregon Watershed Management Board, they are the ones that get the lottery funds and give out the grants, including your capacity grants. Finally, there's lots of resources and trainings available. Obviously, Morgan and Sandy and myself are available for answering any kind of questions. We love getting phone calls, emails, anything. We love to help you out. We have a website, and on that website now we actually have a whole section with all these trainings. And so you can go there, you can get copies of the presentations, handouts, and also soon you'll get to see all the recordings of these sessions online. There's email lists, both from us and Ocean and SWCD. If you're a manager, there's a particular manager's email list that comes through, I believe, Ocean, or talk to another manager to get on it. We have our district guidebook. You can download it, or it might be in your office. It's on our website. It's this nice big thick book, which has extremely detailed information on all these topics and a lot more about the day-to-day operations of your district. And as I said, Special Districts itself does trainings. So there's lots of resources out there, but please understand that, feel free to call us at any time. We're glad to help you. And that wraps it up in a nutshell. So if there's any questions out there, I'd be glad to answer them. As I said, questions, this format is really hard, but feel free to ask them. Other than that, thank you for attending. As I said, this has been recorded. It's available for you or anyone else on your staff. And that's it. So if you don't have any questions, have a great day, and perhaps I'll see some of the rest of you at other times. You're welcome.